the Golden Gate Killer. The mid-1970s in California were marked not only by the rise of the counterculture but also by the emergence of a shadow that would darken its sunny landscapes for decades. This sinister presence, initially known as the East Area Rapist, began his malevolent journey in Sacramento. June 18, 1976. In the suburb of Rancho Cordova, a nightmare unfurled. A young woman, home alone, became the first known victim of a masked intruder who would go on to terrify California for a decade. With a ski mask covering his face and speaking through clenched teeth, he restrained her with shoelaces, ransacked her home, and assaulted her. Strangely, he showed a peculiar preference for personal, overvaluable items, often leaving behind expensive jewelry and electronics but taking souvenirs of personal significance. The attacks grew both in frequency and brutality. Detective Richard Shelby of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office started to piece together a profile. The perpetrator's patterns became chillingly clear. Homes near open fields or drainage ditches were targeted, perhaps offering easy escape routes. His meticulousness was evident. He would break into these homes when empty, familiarizing himself with the layout, unloading guns, and even pre-planning ligatures for future assaults. 1977 through 1978. As months passed, Sacramento was on edge. The masked figure's audacity was growing. His signature became more refined and terrifying. In cases involving couples, his sadism came to the fore. Men were restrained in one room while their partners were assaulted in another. He would place dishes on the men's backs, ensuring that any movement would alert him. His objective was clear: instilling maximum fear. October 1st, 1977. The terror was exacerbated when a chilling phone call reached the police. A voice, cold and menacing, whispered, "I'm the East Side Rapist and you can't catch me." Detective Shelby was deeply entrenched in the case by now, coordinating with other law enforcement agencies, cross-referencing clues, and collating testimonies from victims. But the predator remained elusive, his familiarity with police procedures becoming evident. February 2nd, 1978. Rancho Cordova witnessed a chilling incident that marked a significant shift in the predator's modus operandi. Brian and Katie Maggiore, a young, vibrant couple, were out on an evening stroll with their dog in their quiet suburban neighborhood. Their path crossed with that of a suspicious masked man lurking around a house. It's believed that the Maggiores may have noticed something amiss, possibly even identifying the notorious East Area Rapist in the act of prowling or preparing for another assault. What ensued was a frantic chase through backyards, which tragically culminated in an open area behind a residence. Both Brian and Katie were gunned down, their lives cut short in cold blood. The discovery of their bodies sent shockwaves through the community. The audacity of the perpetrator was evident. He had transitioned from a rapist to a murderer. As Northern California grappled with this evolving threat, Visalia was being tormented by the series of peculiar burglaries committed by the Visalia ransacker. His fixation was evident in his choice of items, personal trinkets over valuables. September 11, 1975. The Visalia community was rocked by a heinous crime that would forever alter the life of the Snelling family. Beth Snelling, a bright 16-year-old high school student known for her infectious laughter and kind nature, found herself at the center of the ransacker's most violent act to date. Late at night, she was awakened by an intruder attempting to drag her out of her home. The sound of her terrified screams echoed in the night air, piercing the tranquil facade of the neighborhood. Her father, Claude Snelling, without a second thought for his safety, rushed to his daughter's aid. His intervention allowed Beth to escape, but it came at a devastating cost. Claude was shot twice, dying on the spot, a true hero who had given his life to save his daughter. The community was in disbelief. The ransacker had escalated from burglar to murderer. By the late 1970s, the East Area Rapist had instilled a palpable sense of fear throughout Northern California. However, as the heat from law enforcement intensified in the north, a string of remarkably similar crimes began unfolding along the coast of Southern California. October 1, 1979. Dr. Robert Offerman and Alexandria Manning were brutally murdered in their Goleta residence. The scene was eerily reminiscent of the East Area Rapist's signatures: shoelaces and blindfolds, with the assailant taking more time than a regular burglar would, indulging in food from the victim's refrigerator. However, the difference was that the violence had escalated, leaving behind not just traumatized survivors but dead bodies. Detective Lara Mitchell from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office took a keen interest in this case. Having heard of the East Area Rapist's activities up north, she initiated correspondence with Detective Richard Shelby, comparing notes and searching for links. March 13, 1980. Another Goleta couple, Charlene and Lyman Smith, met a similarly grim fate. Charlene, a successful attorney, and Lyman, a well-respected judge, were found bound and bludgeoned to death in their residence. Detective Mitchell's suspicions seemed to be turning into a horrifying reality. The beast from the north had seemingly relocated and was now marking his territory in the south. He was soon dubbed the original Night Stalker, distinguishing him from Richard Ramirez, who would later be labeled the Night Stalker. The year progressed with an agonizing sense of déjà vu. Cherry Domingo and her boyfriend, Gregory Sanchez, were murdered in July in Goleta. As with previous victims, they were tied up, and the scene had an unsettlingly familiar methodical chaos. The assailant seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from terrorizing his victims, with the act of violation being secondary to the psychological torture he inflicted. Detective Mitchell and her team were under tremendous pressure. They coordinated with multiple agencies, including the FBI. Special Agent David Bowditch entered the scene, bringing with him a set of fresh eyes and a renewed determination. The task force pored over every scrap of evidence: fingerprints, footprints, even minute fibers. As they worked, the assailant seemed to grow bolder. He would taunt his victims with threatening phone calls, his breathy, sinister voice a stark reminder of their ordeal. May 4, 1986. The grim dance continued with the murder of Janelle Cruz in Irvine. 18-year-old Janelle was home alone when she was assaulted and subsequently bludgeoned to death. This crime was particularly brutal, even by the Night Stalker's appalling standards. The aftermath painted a grotesque tableau of unleashed rage, hinting at the beast's escalating instability. Following this crime, an uneasy silence descended. The crimes that had plagued California for a decade seemed to abruptly cease, but the scars remained. Investigators, although not actively pursuing new leads, never truly abandoned the case. The year 1986 marked a sudden cessation in the series of crimes associated with the East Area Rapist original Night Stalker. Whether he had vanished, changed his modus operandi, or been imprisoned for unrelated crimes, investigators could only speculate. The trauma he left in his wake, however, was impossible to erase. Families mourned, survivors struggled, and detectives were haunted by the shadowy figure they had failed to unmask. Detective Lara Mitchell, now with a decade's worth of investigative experience, couldn't let go. She spent countless hours revisiting old case files, looking for overlooked clues. She worked closely with Detective Richard Shelby from Sacramento, Special Agent David Bowditch from the FBI, and even reached out to retired officers who had been involved in the initial investigations. Together, They formed an informal task force, one dedicated to connecting the dots. 1991. A significant breakthrough came in the form of DNA technology. Although still in its infancy, it offered a glimmer of hope. Multiple crime scenes from both the northern and southern parts of California yielded biological evidence, and when cross-referenced, a singular, chilling truth emerged. The East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person. This revelation sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. It meant that a single individual was responsible for a crime spree spanning over a decade, covering vast distances and evolving in its brutality. The geographical profile now covered most of California, from the alleys of Visalia to the coastal homes of Santa Barbara. 2001. The DNA samples collected from different crime scenes were uploaded to a national database. Although there wasn't an immediate match, it allowed for cross-referencing with other potential cases, widening the net even further. As the years progressed, so did technology. The Golden State Killer's DNA was continuously run against evolving databases. Advancements in genealogy and the popularity of DNA ancestry testing platforms provided investigators with a new angle. 2016. A relatively new technique called forensic genealogy was gaining traction. By cross-referencing crime scene DNA with public genealogy databases, detectives could narrow down potential family trees. The idea was to find a common ancestor and then branch out, looking for potential suspects. Detective Mitchell, although nearing retirement, saw this as the final chance. With the help of forensic genealogists, they began the painstaking process of tracing familial connections. Month after month, they pieced together a vast family tree, narrowing down branches and looking for individuals who fit the profile. April 24, 2018. The relentless pursuit bore fruit. A name emerged from the depths of countless records: Joseph James DeAngelo. A former police officer, his past was littered with red flags, fired for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent, living in the areas of the attacks during the relevant time periods, and having a murky personal life. With this lead, authorities kept DeAngelo under surveillance, discreetly collecting his discarded DNA. The match was conclusive. Joseph James DeAngelo was the East Area rapist, the original Night Stalker, the Visalia ransacker. He was the Golden State Killer. The capture of DeAngelo marked the end of a nightmare that had spanned over 4 decades. The communities he had terrorized could finally find some semblance of closure, and the detectives, especially Laura Mitchell, felt the weight of a haunting specter lift. The arrest of Joseph James DeAngelo was the headline that dominated media outlets nationwide. The face of a man responsible for countless horrors was now visible to the world. Behind the wrinkled, aged exterior lay a predator who had evaded capture for decades. DeAngelo's defense was quick to build a case around his age, arguing the frailty of an old man who could barely stand without support. But for the survivors and the families of the victims, this was a facade they refused to buy into. The trial was a monumental event. Prosecutors pooled evidence from different jurisdictions, collating testimonies, DNA evidence, and eyewitness accounts. Detectives like Laura Mitchell and Richard Shelby were key witnesses, recounting their long and arduous chase. Beth Snelling, who had survived a harrowing encounter in her teenage years, courageously took the stand. Her recounting of that fateful night and the loss of her heroic father, Claude Snelling, left the courtroom in tears. The testimony of survivors was an agonizing trip down memory lane, rekindling traumas, but it also showcased resilience and the indomitable human spirit. June 29, 2020 marked a significant turn in the trial. In a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and special circumstances, including murder committed during burglaries and rapes, as well as 13 counts of kidnapping. The courtroom was packed with survivors, family members, and members of the media. The sentencing hearing in August was an emotionally charged event. Survivors and family members were given the opportunity to confront D'Angelo, to look into the eyes of the beast and reclaim their power. The impact statements painted a vivid picture of the lasting trauma and the strength it took to move forward. On August 21, 2020, Joseph James D'Angelo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The monster of California had finally been caged. In the aftermath, the Golden State Killer case prompted profound reflections on investigative methods, the importance of preserving evidence, and the evolving nature of DNA technology in crime solving. It served as a testament to the tenacity of detectives and the resilience of survivors. But, perhaps most importantly, it stood as a beacon of hope for countless other cold cases, a promise that justice, no matter how delayed, could eventually prevail.